Welcome to another episode of the More Than a Game podcast. Joining me on the podcast today is former NBL and Boomers player Mark Nash. Mark played 12 seasons across 3 different NBL teams. This includes stints with the Hobart Tassie Devils, the Brisbane Bullets, and also the Adelaide 36ers, where he won the 2002 championship. He's also suited up for the Boomers, most prominently at the 2001 Goodwill Games, and since retiring from basketball, he's still in and around the sport, helping out with coaching and other bits and pieces. It's a pleasure to have him on the podcast today to hear his story. Mark Nash, welcome to the More Than a Game podcast.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Great to join you, and looking forward to having a chat.
Well, but if you want to take us back to the very beginning, this is the question I'll start with all our guests. What drew you to the sport of basketball first and foremost, growing up in Tasmania as well? And at what point did you think, I can make it as a professional basketball player? What were the circumstances in and around that?
Yeah, well, look, it is such a great game. But for me, growing up, I was more of an individual sports person. So things like tennis and running were the sports that I probably had more success at. But played a lot of cricket and Aussie rules football. So it was that real Aussie upbringing. And I remember it was my high school days when a couple of mates were out in the playground. They were playing one-on-one basketball. I'd never played, was watching them, and they were talking about, I'm Rucker, you're Grace. I'm like, who are these guys they're talking about? Of course, it was Derek Rucker and Ricky Grace. And then I started watching the NBL, which was the really late night, Friday night replays. And that was a bit of my introduction. Then started playing with a school team. And being a bit taller, like I'm 6'6", and I started as a 13 or 14-year-old. I wasn't this tall, but I was still sort of a tall and lanky kid, so got opportunities, and mates at school asked me to play, and just really fell in love with the game, and got Dad to hang a hoop up in the backyard. We lived on a bit of a rural 5-acre property, so I could be out there 11 o'clock at night, no neighbours yelling out, just shooting and rebounding. And I wasn't very good, couldn't dribble the ball, but I did learn to shoot the ball and to rebound, and I think they were the 2 things that got me opportunity, and then went on to play representatively for Tasmania and some Oz champs. And my particular year group was unbelievable for people that follow the game in Australia. Players like Sam McKinnon and Chris Anstey was a year above, CJ Bruton, Simon Dwight, Aaron Trahead. It's about 15 plus guys that went on to have decade-long NBL careers. So I just thought that was normal talent level. But the game has just provided so many opportunities. But it was really that hook in the early 90s when basketball was booming, but still a bit invisible. And there was an NBL team in Hobart, but I never actually went along and watched them play. It was all just schoolyard stuff, and then playing with mates, which led to tremendous opportunities.
That's so good. At what point did you think, I can give this a crack? And was there a certain point where you thought, this is what I want to do for a living?
Yeah, well, it was as I was getting towards the later stages of high school, so sort of year 11, 12, I was playing senior men's basketball, and we talked off air about Billy Tomlinson. He was the coach of Hobart's NBL team at the time, and he came along to the local men's club grand final. I had a pretty good game and got a bunch of rebounds, and we ended up winning. And he just came up to me after the game and said, look, we've got some open runs, that sort of style for Hobart. So I went along to that, and then was offered a development program, like a DP spot for the old Tassie Devils in 1994. So that was directly out of finishing grade 12, and we were a super young team. So again, there was opportunity. There was really no payments for players at that time, very much part time. So I started at uni at the time. So I'd be go to classes during the day, train with the NBL team in the evening, and then I was also playing with the local, what is now NBL 1 level team. So it was pretty much hoops all the time with a bit of class and things around that. But that was part of my journey into the NBL. And then I played the very last game of that season when one of the stars of the team just pulled up a bit sore. We were way outside any playoff run. So suited up against the old Southeast Melbourne Magic.
Wow.
And then I actually earned a roster spot going into the 95 season. So I played 2 years with the Hobart Devils on a full roster spot.
It's amazing. So we mentioned Billy Tomlinson, he was the coach, but let's go back to that time. It was a pivotal time in basketball history in Australia. Obviously the 90s was basketball was pretty prominent. But what did that period mean to you personally, and to be part of that team? And what does it mean to you to have the JackJumpers back in the league and having a a team that represents the region of Tasmania in the league again.
Yeah, it was an unreal time, and for me, I was 19 when I was really started traveling with the team and going to arenas like Rod Laver, where they just played New Orleans Pelicans for their last week.
Yeah.
So it's an iconic venue, and to be out there, playing against guys like Andrew Gaze and see one of your former podcast guests, Leonard Copeland. This was prime time Melbourne Tigers, and just for a kid from Hobart to be in that environment was unreal. I got a taste of the green and gold that year as well. Made the Australian under-20 team. I'd never been overseas. We ended up going to the World Cup in Athens in Greece. We played against guys like Vince Carter, Stephen Marbury. Thankfully, Kevin Garnett was going to be in that team, but he was drafted, so he missed that tournament. And we ended up going through to the gold medal game.
Wow.
We got a silver medal in front of 20,000 people, played Greece in the final in Athens. Someone flicked the lights out when we were making a comeback. It was just, incredible. So, that experience of playing, but then to do the full circle of coming back to Hobart as a dad after my NBL time was up, I still kept playing with Hobart again in the old SCABL, which is now NBL 1. And to see now that the JackJumpers here, that was always my dream of coming back saying, look, there should be an NBL team here in Tasmania. But the way the JackJumpers have done it, the branding, that state pride, we're a bit like West Australians, very parochial.
Yeah.
There's the whole Scott Roth mantra of defend the island, which everyone's really got around. So it's been incredible. And now to see a WNBL program coming in for next season has been terrific. So, I do a bit of work. I cover the games with ABC Radio, so I get that fix of being in the environment without the pressures of being a player or a coach at that level. So, still love being around the NBL.
Yeah, it's awesome, mate. And to win the championship in one of their first few seasons, unbelievable. Were you at the game, and what was the atmosphere like when they won it?
Yeah, we covered the game. And sometimes we're almost in our own little bubble when you have the headsets on. I'm talking with our play-by-play guy, and then occasionally just lift out the headsets. And I've been to a lot of great arenas in the country. From playing in Adelaide when it was 8,000 people every night at the old Clipsal Powerhouse to RAC Arena in Perth. But there's something pretty special in Hobart because it's 4,500 people. Everyone's right on top of you. It's a newly refurbed arena, so the sound is off the charts. And it was quite incredible with players like Jack McVeigh, who then went on to have an amazing run at the Olympics and into the NBA, and now it's back in opposing colours up in far north Queensland. So it's been great for the state of Tasmania. I think basketball right across the country is booming, but particularly pleasing to see the NBL flourishing. And it was a very different story in the mid-90s when it was quite invisible. And even though there was a lot of talent in the league, the general sporting public really wouldn't have known. And I remember when I was out of the league in 97, the only way I could find out the scores was I'd go to the uni library and get a copy of the Australian newspaper and get, it had the top scorers.
Wow.
That was how I followed the NBL when I was out for a year. So it's just terrific now how the league is now playing against NBA teams. And there's a real global spotlight on what's happening in Australian basketball.
Yeah, no, there sure is. I just, as you were talking, remember Billy Tomlinson was on our podcast a few years back. I think they just announced that the Tasmanian team were going to come back into the NBL, and to see them win a championship, it's just been incredible to ride and to see the journey that team has been on. But you spent time with the Brisbane Bullets and then most prominently the Adelaide 36ers. I think that's when I started following the sport and getting into the NBL around the Sydney 2000 Olympics was the moment for me that really got me excited about the sport and started following it. But you won a championship in 2002 with that team. It was such a loaded team. Got to play with guys like Brett Maher, Martin Catalini, Willie Farley. The list goes on. It was such an amazing side. Unfortunately, you beat my team, the Western Sydney Razorbacks, at the time. It was an amazing series. I remember listening to it on the radio, actually, because it wasn't on TV all the time. So I was listening to it on the radio. But what are your memories of that time in 2002, but also most prominently with your overall time with the Adelaide 36ers?
Yeah, it was a bit of a dream for me coming into Adelaide. I had, as you mentioned, Dan, the 3 years with the Brisbane Bullets, which was amazing. But my last year and a bit wasn't terrific up there. There was a change of coach, and he essentially said, "Look, we don't think we've got a meaningful role for you." So I was pretty close to going up to Townsville. But then my coach in Brisbane, Brian Curl, was good mates with Phil Smythe in Adelaide. And he said, look, Phil's keen to give you a call. He kind of looks for multi-positional players, just the style of play they have that can shoot, and think you'd be a good fit. So ended up sliding into Adelaide in 2000, and we ended up losing the series to the Illawarra Hawks, which has gone down as one of the greatest sort of semi-finals, when Damon Lowry hits 3 free throws with no time left on the clock. So we're up by 2. Darnell Mee took a big swing at him at half court, fouled him, and Lowry went and made 3 free throws, which comes up on all my social media feeds on the anniversary of that, all these years later. But to be able to then back up the following year, which was intended to be a bit of a rebuilding year for the club, they'd I think agreed in principle to bring Catalini back. So the club had won a couple of championships in Phil Smythe's first 2 years, and they missed the finals. And they'd agreed with Rogers and Catalini coming in for that the year after. But we actually had an amazing import in Willie Farley, who came in. They used to sort of refer to him as Baby Jordan. He was out of Chicago and had the shaved head, so he was very Jordan-esque. But
one of my favourite players.
he was unreal. But to be a part of that team, Brett Maher was just incredible. Guys like David Stiff, and we had a bit of a hiccup during the middle of the season, but then got back on track. The league actually adjusted the format of some of the finals, which worked in our favour. So we got the first home game in the grand final series, whereas prior to that, you'd play away, then 2 at home. So we won the first one, then we lost over in West Sydney with guys, Derek Rucker, Simon Dwight, Scott McGregor, terrific team. But then to be able to win the championship, back in our home court in Adelaide was an incredible experience. And that was a big part of the drive and the motivation of going to such a successful club. And it's quite almost surreal that that's the last Adelaide championship, and we've seen teams like the Perth Wildcats and Melbourne United, New Zealand Breakers dominate the last couple of decades. But I think Adelaide might give it a bit of a red hot go this year with Bryce Cotton coming in. But for me, a lot of fun memories in Adelaide. I was married in Adelaide. We had our first child born in Adelaide. So it's hard to believe it's so long ago, but really terrific memories, and both on and off the court.
Absolutely. It was an incredible team. And around that time too, you made your debut for the Boomers as well. So we'll go into that. I remember recording a game at the 2001 Goodwill Games. I used to watch and repeat, and you were part of that team. The Goodwill Games is no longer, but that would have been an incredible experience too. It would have felt like Olympics somewhat, no doubt, with all the different teams from all around the world. I'm not sure. Remind me. The game that I recorded was against Argentina. I'm pretty sure that Walter Herman. But I kept watching that you guys won. But did you end up taking on USA at all? Because they had some young players at the time, but they were quite phenomenal players still, like Sean Marion and Shane Battier, I think, were part of that team. Jason Terry. So did you end up taking them on, or was this an opportunity?
We actually. So it was being the year after Sydney, which was that star-studded NBA veteran team that won gold. They'd almost rebooted, so that it was, as you mentioned, Dan, a bit of an up-and-comers league, which a lot of these players went on to have 15-year amazing pro careers. So we actually played the USA in an exhibition game prior to the tournament. So that was actually down in Melbourne. Played that Team USA. I got to hit the court. I didn't play a lot in the team, and I got a very late call up. So Phil Smythe was my Adelaide coach. He then came into the Boomers job after the Olympic cycle, was looking to take the program sort of through the next phase. There was a late injury withdrawal, so I got the call up from Phil. We actually went to the East Asian Games in overseas in China first. Actually, it was in Japan and that was playing against Yao Ming. So got some amazing experiences to play against some players that went on to have terrific careers. But playing that Team USA was quite incredible. A lot of guys like I said, Kenyon Martin, Baron Davis, Sean Marion, Jason Terry, Carlos Boozer, I think, was in that team. So they went on, and they were terrific. I just remember seeing Kenyon Martin in the warm-ups. We were playing the next game and just head on the hoop type of stuff, and again, incredible experiences. And I was very fortunate to be a part of that, and didn't go on to represent the Boomers at a World Cup or Olympics. But to be able to wear the Australian uniform at a junior and a senior level was a real privilege, and certainly memories that I'm very fond of. And it's terrific to see that the Boomers are just so much more accessible now, and there's sort of the Asia Cups and Olympic qualifiers are more comprehensive. And we're really happy here in Hobart that it's just been announced today that the Boomers will play New Zealand in late November down here in Hobart in the JackJumpers arena. So, looking forward to hopefully getting along to that game.
Absolutely, mate. And just going back to that time, because you mentioned the USA, Team USA were going through a bit of a rebuild. So were the Boomers at that time. After the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games, Andrew Gage retired, Shane Hill retired. There was a number of players that didn't come back. I think the only players from the Olympics was Brett Maher and Paul Rogers from memory, and a team full of youngsters. So when you went into that tournament, did you feel the pressure at all, or what was the experience like going into that tournament?
Yeah, it was a huge, changing the guard in that respect. So Sam McKinnon was in that group, but he was injured at the time. So there was no Gaze, no Hill, no Andrew Blahov, Brad Keane, and Luke Longley. So that was the starting five, but not just the starting five, but icons of Australian basketball. So for all those guys, and I'm assuming it would have been a bit of a pack agreement and say, look, guys, let's do Sydney, and then we'll all go out together. But it shows how important succession planning is. And at that time, basketball was quite unsophisticated, I would say, at that level. The Boomers, no doubt, would be looking at depth charts and looking, 2-3 cycles ahead, and probably recruiting and cycling players through to say, well, you bring in a Josh Giddey, who's, going to be ready for the next 4-year cycle. So to have all those guys leave, there was a lot of youthful enthusiasm. In that group, but unfortunately, and I didn't make the team that went to the New Zealand qualifying series, but Australia actually lost that 3-game series to New Zealand and missed out on going to the World Championships, it was called at the time, not the World Cup. And actually, cost Phil Smythe his tenure of the team. I think he decided to walk away, but just a lot of backlash from Australia going to lose to New Zealand, but it was a very different team, and it was also the New Zealand super team that had guys like Pero Cameron and Kirk Penny, all these guys that, and they went on to finish, contending for a medal at that World Cup. So it was almost wrong place, wrong time for that Australian team to go and play a really hot New Zealand team. And there was, no doubt a lot of the guys that didn't get opportunities in future Australian teams because of the, perception of failure in that tournament. But it just shows the brutality of sport. That's right. Three-game series, everything's on the line. Packed, courts over in New Zealand, and it was a bit of a dark time for Australian basketball. But then, Brian Gorgian came in as the next coach, and finally got that medal a couple of decades later.
That's right, and it was a critical experience that as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned Phil Smythe there. You obviously spent a number of years under him, an incredible player in his own right, but very successful coach as well. What was it like being coached by Phil for all those years, particularly at Adelaide?
Yeah, it was incredible, and I just really loved the way that Phil went about things. He was, very much a player's coach, and we all know the career he had as a player. But to be able to come in and win 2 championships in his first year as a coach, and he wasn't a micromanager, so he'd let the players play. He was very good. Those teams that he formed with, Darnell Mee and Brett Maher and Catalini for the first couple of championships were just absolutely incredible. I think it's a bit of a shame that Phil didn't coach longer in the NBL. I think it was, after that sort of Australian saga I mentioned, losing to New Zealand, and then the 36ers went on a little bit of a downward spiral, but there was ownership changes, there was leadership changes around CEOs and board directors, which have a big impact on programs. And you can see that Adelaide was, well off the pace for a long, long time. When I was there, the club was owned by Basketball South Australia. There were very successful business people running the club that resourced it well. Which was quite incredible. So I think for me, it's looking at Phil's career, saying I think it was just a bit short. He perhaps coached for 6 or 7 years in the NBL to win 3 championships, and I think he was somewhat ahead of his time as far as the way he structured things. He was very much about almost positionless basketball, that you had to be able to do everything on the court. It was a lot of, read and react rather than overly complex, offensive systems where you get a playbook that's 100 pages long and you've got to memorize all these plays. It was very much about empowering players to make decisions. And when you have players like Brett Maher and Willie Farley, most games when you watch championship series, if it's a close game down the stretch, it's not because of a brilliant coaching scheme or system. It's like, give the player the ball, create some time and space for that player, and usually the player has to create something that's quite brilliant. So I'm now a coach. I wish I could be more like Phil with his calm demeanour. He'd sit on the side. I get a little bit wound up in the game myself, and probably a bit emotive play to play. But I really enjoyed my time playing under Phil.
That's good. Going into your sort of pre-game ritual, or taking us behind the scenes a little bit, you're a hard-working player, team first player, some might say. It was evident on the court, but how did you mentally approach your role with the team, but also particularly in those high-pressure situations? Like you see a lot of it today, players get into that mindset and going through a routine or whatever the case may be to get into that winning mindset. So what was it for you, particularly playing in those situations like the Boomers or in playoff series? What was it for you that got you going and got you up and about?
Yeah, for me, because I wasn't a huge scorer, I think my highest average on a year was sort of around 10 points a game. I was more of probably a defensive minded player, and would be sort of that glue guy that could play a couple of different positions. And quite often I'd get I might start a game where I'm guarding the point guard in the opposition team, just being a bit taller and longer and be able to carry a hand. But then Chris Anstey starts giving us problems, so the coach is right now guarding Chris. So a lot of my preparation was around defensive matchups, and we had relatively primitive at my time scouting and analytics. And I still remember when I was in Adelaide to start with, Steve Breeney, the assistant coach, would have a VHS recorder, so they'd be side by side, put one VHS in, record that. That's where you get your game film. You do that 12 times over to give all the guys. And then DVDs came in. We were like, wow, this is so high tech that. So there wasn't the same level of analytics that players have now, and it's just incredible how they can sort of dive in and look at how many pick and rolls a team makes, or how many times Bryce Cotton's going to go left for a pull up jump shot. So. For me, it was the defensive mindset, and I often found if I could hit a couple of shots early, then it just sort of released that pressure. I'm quite envious now of the way that sporting teams at the professional level are resourced with sports psychologists and rehab and recovery and all those things that can really assist preparation. But for us, it was a lot more old school. And for me, just coming back to the question about preparation, a lot of it was around that defensive mindset and locking in there. And if I could do a good job there, I felt that offensively the game started to flow a bit more for me when I was involved at the defensive end and rebounding the ball.
That's awesome, mate. So going into your retirement now and the transition to off the court, you hear a lot of the players these days, like they really struggle with that transition from retirement into everyday life. So what was that experience for you? First of all, making that decision to retire, but then was that transition hard going into retirement, or was it a bit easier for yourself?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Professional athletes in all sports are faced with that because in a lot of other professional careers, your time in your profession, you actually sort of increase your value, but for professional athletes, you do nosedives the other way. So I was 31 when I knew it was time with the NBL. I actually had another year to go on my contract in Adelaide, but had a pretty honest conversation with Phil Smythe, and there wasn't going to be a big role. I'd had a number of injuries that were really, I guess, hampering my performance, but also from a mental aspect, when you talk about preparation and a season, just coming in when your body's not able to handle that, it can also start messing with your mind. So I was actually really comfortable and confident that I knew it was time to stop playing, but I still had a bit of an itch to have that competitive side. So we were based in Adelaide. Christy, my wife, and I, we had 2 young kids at the time, 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, but had the opportunity sort of working out where to go and what to do next. But I felt like I could get through the next level down. So decided to move back to Hobart, which is where I grew up. And I ended up playing about another 5 or 6 seasons with the Hobart Chargers in the SEABL, now NBL 1. So that was terrific. And Anthony Stewart, who's another Tasmanian, played a few years longer than me in the NBL, hung up the boots at the same time. So we both just by coincidence moved back to Hobart at the time. We played together at the Chargers. And then we're trying to work out what you do off the court, and we were successful. We didn't really know what we were doing, but through the club, we applied for some grant funding around sort of healthy, active lifestyles. So had a couple of years where we were playing for Hobart, still travelling interstate, sort of through Victoria, and then delivering this great program in local schools, which was, I guess, a bit of a soft landing for me. Like I knew I was out of the NBL. Unfortunately for me, I mentioned, Dan, that I was at uni when I was in Hobart, but when I moved to Brisbane, distance education wasn't very good. So I actually didn't finish that degree, which is one of the big regrets that I have. And I think, players are really fortunate now that quite often the clubs will subsidise their studies and support them and negotiate. I just remember one lecturer I had, it was around that time of going to Greece for the World Championships. And I said, look, I'm away for 3 weeks. I don't have a laptop. I can't get these assignments in. And basically the lecturer said, well, if you don't, you fail the course. So I said, well, I guess I'll see you next year in the course again. So it was just a really different era. So I didn't finish those sort of professional qualifications, but after tinkering around for a while, ended up sort of getting my way into local government, state government, and then spent a decade in non-profits, sort of working in sport and health, which was amazing. So for me, it was a fairly seamless transition out. Like I didn't have, I guess, some of the downs that you see of players in, many different sports that lose identity. I had plenty going with a young family. I found the competitive drive off the court as well, being able to try and, solve problems in business and, understanding how to navigate, government bureaucracy and all those things. I found that quite stimulating, and then still got to have a bit of a run around on the weekends playing in the NBL 1 equivalent. So for me, I have no regrets. I often wonder, well, could I have been, more assertive in the NBL and be more of a scorer? Could I this, could I that? But I don't lose any sleep over that. I'm really happy and feel very blessed with the opportunities the sport's given me. And now the last 5 years, I've been back full-time in basketball in a private basketball academy in Hobart. We take kids all around the country. We're planning overseas tours now. So, the game's been really good for me, and I'm excited about the future, both on and off the court.
So good, mate. Just going back to one thing you touched on in terms of not finding your identity in the game of basketball or sport in general. So that was, I guess, part of my struggle too. I think I found my identity too much in basketball. So when I was taken away from it, there was a bit of a period of trying to find myself and find who I was. But for younger players maybe listening to this, or current professional players listening, what was it for you? How did you what did you put in place to ensure that your identity wasn't wrapped in basketball? Because it can be taken from you in an instant. Obviously, you've been lucky to be in and around the sport still. But how important is it to not, I guess, have your identity wrapped in and around the sport?
Yeah, look, it's extremely important, and it's easy to say that in theory, but in practice, it is quite difficult. And I remember for me, and I think if you look at most professional athletes, whether they're, or when I say, I probably should say elite athletes. So you don't necessarily have to be earning a living out of it, but if you're really competing at an elite level, you have to be quite obsessive about it, and it often means that you miss out on time with family, you miss friends, you miss milestones. And for me, I didn't think twice about any of that when I was competing, because you are very obsessive. But I think for me, one of the big things that helped was becoming a parent, and that was terrific to see. Well, you're not just responsible for yourself anymore, but you're responsible for others. And I think the other big thing for me is my Christian faith, which I've always grown up in a Christian family, so there was another identity there that we have as Christians. But again, it's easy to say that, but when there's adversity in life and when there's challenges in life, or also when people are just fully challenging you, why do you believe that? And a lot of those were questions that I wasn't really sure of myself. So that was a big part of things for me. So I know it's tough for people, and that we talk about some of the support. I think it's really important to have strong support networks, whether that's family or friends or people within the sport. So you don't get too carried away with the wins, and you don't get too down with the losses. But
absolutely,
again, over the journey, it's a lot easier to say that than to actually do that. I did find.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's so good. Just to wrap things up, a couple of questions just in terms of looking back in your career now. Is there one moment in your career that you look back on that you think really shaped you as a player on and off the court, or as a person as well? Any moment in time or in your career that really stands out for you in that space?
Yeah, I think it's probably going back to those Adelaide days that I think I probably found my niche, that I could be someone that could go out in an elite environment, play in front of 8,000 people, and I had some of my best games in the big moments. So again, I mentioned I was never a 20 points a game person, but I had a couple of really good games against the Sydney Kings, which was like the Shane Hill, Matt Nielsen era, and the Adelaide fans just absolutely hated Shane Hill. There was some famous footage of him exiting the stadium and with some gestures to the fans and things. So
I remember that one.
I just really, I guess, thrived in those moments. And what was really pleasing was being able to have my best contributions in those biggest games. But for me, that was really that identity of going out, and if I could do my job well, then it would help Brett Maher. And I remember Steve Breeney, our assistant coach. I mentioned him before, but one day someone was having a grizzle about, well, Brett Maher and Willie Farley have too many shots, and his thing was, well, their role is actually to be a scorer, and if they're not doing that, then you guys don't have the talent to do that. And I just found that was a really interesting insight, that whether it's in sport or whether it's in education or business settings, that the people have roles, and they can be quite different. And you need the superstars, you need the defensive players, you need the detail people, you need the visionary people. And I think those learnings really helped me as I did transition into other settings to be able to take that and say, well, what's my role, and how can I really help my team, whatever that environment is, to thrive.
That's great. And you mentioned some of the superstars you played with. Just to finish up, when you look back in your career, who was the probably one or two of the best players you played with, and maybe one or two of the best players you played against in your career?
Yeah. Well, I think if I was looking at prime time, if I could have the number one pick of any players I played with, it would be Brett Maher. And he comes across as quite an unassuming guy, like say in the media, but he was ruthless. He was just such a competitor. And for a guy, his size, if you looked at him from a talent ID point, you'd say, well, this guy's not a basketballer, but just again was able to deliver in those really big moments. So Brett Maher was incredible. I got to have 3 seasons with Leroy Loggins, which was awesome for me in Brisbane. And he was 39 years old at the time. Now, I thought that was ancient. Now, I'm 49 now. But I feel like I've got a lot of life to go. But to be able to play with Leroy, a guy called Steve Woodbury was in that team, who was probably the most talented basketballer that I've ever played with. Yeah. And then when you talk about who you played against, in the NBL, it was some of those West Sydney guys. John Riley, I had to guard him quite a bit. He was incredible. It's quite fun seeing him now as a very hot-headed NBL coach of the Perth Wildcats, but he was unreal. And then getting to play against guys like Vince Carter and Yao Ming and some of these players who are global superstars of the sport, and really good to see them still involved. So again, I talked about being very blessed through basketball, and that's really how I describe my time in the sport.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know I said that was the last question, but one last question for you, mate. Out of all your career, what was the highlight? Was it that 2002 championship playing for the Boomers? What would you pinpoint as the thing you feel most blessed to experience?
Yeah, certainly. If you're looking at that highlight, was absolutely incredible. Winning that championship, and at the time, there's just such exhilaration of being able to win that on the home floor. And it's, I remember one of my teammates saying, when you win a championship, it's like you've completed the season.
Yeah.
So if you miss the finals, or if you get knocked out in the first round, there's still games to go that you're missing out on. But to actually have that, get to the last game of the season and say there's no more games, we've won the whole thing, was absolutely quite incredible. But if I look at what's the thing that I miss most, it's actually the training environment, and particularly the training environment in Adelaide. We were very fortunate to train in the same arena that we played at. We had an amazing locker room, which I think's now even gone to another whole level. But that's what I really miss, the banter with the guys. And I had a locker next to Rupert Sapwell, and he's just one of the best guys you'll ever meet. I still talk to him, not as much as I'd like to, but still a couple of times a year. They're the things I really miss. Paul Reeves, who was a big 6'9" dairy farmer from country Victoria, just the locker room banter and antics is the thing that I really miss of just that. It's a very unique work environment, and when I try and explain that to people, it's way out of touch of reality. And if I'm ever talking to current players, I'm just saying, just really savor that moment, because it's just so unique. And you make mates for life. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's so good, mate. Well, it's been a pleasure hearing your story, mate. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. But Mark Nash, thank you for joining us on the More Than a Game podcast.
You're most welcome. Thanks, Dan.